Welcome everyone. Happy Friday. It is that time of week once again for my photography masterclass, where we've been spending a lot of time on the post-processing and on the organization part. We will get to the photography part, don't worry. But for those of you who are new or who are returning, thanks for returning. Thanks for being here either way. And if you're also watching this on the replay, thanks for watching the replay. My name is Terry White, Worldwide Design and Photography Evangelist for Adobe. It is my pleasure to be here streaming to you live every Friday, talking all things photography. And even though we've been focused a lot on the desktop and mobile, but we will get to the actual camera stuff soon. All right, so with that said, some shout outs to the people. I see at least two people over on YouTube kind of chimed in already. Vector Walker and Jeff S. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'll probably repeat this once again throughout the broadcast, but that's not where the conversation is. The conversation and all the comments are over on behance.net /live. So if you join me over there, I can see the crowd over here already ready to go. That's where I'll be looking at for questions and answering things and so forth and so on. So thanks for all the folks that are already here. I see Valdair, I see Sean, I see Jacqueline, Victoria, Nomenden, if I'm saying that correctly, Nat, Jason Levine's in the house. What's going on, Jason? Carolyn, Roger, and someone from China. Nick, Lindsay, and William, and more popping in as I can't keep up with the names. But thanks everyone for being here. And Jason just reminded me by seeing his face there that we are doing these master classes every Friday, and it's not just one. So I'm kicking things off in the morning with photography. Then we have our daily creative challenge. And then right after that, Paul Tranny is up doing Photoshop and graphic design. And then I think Jason's up doing audio and video. And then Howard's doing UX, UI design and XD. So you get a full day of master classes, or at least 4 or 5 hours of master classes every Friday. So you can, if you can join us live. You can also watch the replays. And they're all happening, once again, at behance.net /live. That's where all the conversation will happen. So Jeffrey, thanks for joining me from Cleveland. And the folks, I saw someone even middle of the night in Bali. Thanks for being here. And let's go ahead and dive into today's topic instead of just spending time giving shout outs. I welcome everyone and thanks for being here. All right, so we're going to pop over to my computer where I've got Lightroom Classic running. And again, I know this is one of the things that makes it tough on an instructor. There are 2 versions of Lightroom. There are people that are using the traditional version of Lightroom that's been around for a while. That, of course, keeps getting updated. That is Lightroom Classic. And then there's the newer version that is the cloud storage-based Lightroom that I will refer to as Lightroom Cloud, just for the distinction. We're going to take a look at both today, so you don't have to worry about, oh, he's only showing it in Classic, or, oh, he's only showing it in the cloud-based version. Nope, you're going to see both, and time permitting, and I think we'll have time. We'll even see some mobile stuff. So you'll see it on every platform I can work it in on. All right, so with that said, what are we talking about with editing? Now, I've actually broken this class up into 2 parts. We're going to start today in Lightroom editing. Next week, next Friday, we're going to do Photoshop editing because the 2 work hand in hand. And people always ask all the time, well, what's the difference? When would I edit something in Lightroom? Or I only have Lightroom. Why would I ever use Photoshop? Or vice versa. I've always used Photoshop. Why would I ever use Lightroom? So we're going to talk about Lightroom this week. Next week, we're going to talk more about Photoshop, but we're going to tie it into Lightroom as well. And then I think after that, the week after that, we will start shooting and getting into the camera stuff. And that way you guys can learn more about the photography aspect of it as well. All right, so with that said, what do we mean by editing in Lightroom? So in Lightroom Classic, we spent the first few master classes dealing with organization. So we spent the bulk of our time in the library module. This is where all the organization happens. So we showed how to bring your images in and the folders that they end up in. We showed how to make collections and albums. We showed how to organize the photos. We did all that stuff, and you can go back and watch those replays to get caught up on your own time. Today, we're going to talk about, primarily, we're going to spend most of our time in the Develop module. The Develop module in Lightroom is the non-destructive editing module. What I mean by non-destructive is whatever you do in that module does not permanently affect your photo. So you can always go back and undo it. You can always go back and change it. You can always go back and tweak it. You can always go back and just leave it alone. You can always go back to the edits that you do in Lightroom. Now, just for the distinction, in Lightroom Classic, there's a whole separate module for it. It's called Develop. So if I have a photo selected, I pop over to the Develop module, and you can get there with a keyboard shortcut as well. And then I have all these various tabs, these various pull downs. I'm calling them tabs because I'm thinking of Camera Raw. But you have all these basic tabs that you can work in. And we're going to go through them all. We're going to go, or at least most of them. We're going to do a deep dive. Now, if we go over to the cloud version, there is no module. There's no library, develop, slideshow, book, print, web. There are no modules. So same thing, you would select your photo, but then you would just go to edit and you would start doing the same exact sliders, the same exact thing. So everything I'm going to show you, for the most part, would work the same way in either application. There are some things that aren't across the board, and I will point those out when I get to them. But no matter which one you're in, 99% of what I'm going to show you today would work across the board. So, and again, I'll point out the things that aren't the same. All right, so let's pop back over to Classic for now. And one of the things that's right off the bat let me back up a little bit. One more thing about the editing here is if you are a Photoshop user, or even if you're a Bridge user, the Develop module is the exact same thing as what you would do in those programs in Camera Raw. So Camera Raw, Develop module, same technology under the hood, developed by the same person, Thomas Knoll. So it's just all neatly packaged up as a module inside of Lightroom because you're already there organizing your photos. But if you're in Photoshop and you opened up a raw file, it would open up in Camera Raw, you would have the exact same sliders there. Or if you even went to the Camera Raw filter, you would have most of the same sliders there. And of course, in Bridge, you have Camera Raw as well. But we're going to focus our attention on the Develop module since that's what I build this class as. All right, now, where do you start? If I twirl these up, you've got Basic, Detail, Lens Correction, Transform, Effects, Tone Curve, HSL/color, split toning, and by the way, HSL stands for hue, saturation, and luminance. And you have split toning and calibration. Now, that may or may not be the way yours are set up, because you can customize this. You can customize this panel to be in the order you want them in. So I probably have tweaked them. I can put them back to the default order, and yep, I did tweak them. So I moved the tone curve down, I moved maybe effects up. I kind of put them in an order that I work in, but the default order would be Basic, tone curve, so forth and so on. So if yours, you're saying, well, wait a minute, my tone curve's like at the top, not down the bottom. It's because I reordered mine, and you reorder them just by dragging them in the order you want. So how did I get to this? I just right-clicked on one, and I went to Customize Develop Panel. So that's right off the bat in Lightroom Classic. If you didn't know that, that was recently added, that you can rearrange these in the order you work in. And that's a good thing because you were always having to scroll down to ones that you use more often. So now you can move them up to the top so you don't have to do as much scrolling. All right, next up, you notice that when I twirl one down, like Basic, and then let's say I twirl down Transform, Basic gets twirled back up. Because I've got mine set to, and this is another option, I've got mine set to solo mode. So solo mode means only show me the one I'm working in. Don't make me have to scroll the whole Develop panel to constantly go back and forth to get to the ones I'm using. Show me just the ones that I want, that I'm working on at any given time, and automatically close the other ones that I'm not working on. So you can turn that on or off at any given time. If I turn that off now and I twirl down basic, basic stays down. If I go down to transform, transform stays open as well. So it's up to you to work either way you want. I prefer solo mode because chances are I'm only working in one panel at a time and I don't need to see all the other stuff that I'm not working on. So I'm just going to go ahead and go to solo. Okay, so where do I start? Believe it or not, it depends on the camera I shot with because that will make a big determination on what I do first. For example, if I shot this with a mirrorless camera, I have a Nikon Z6, it's a mirrorless camera, then I'm going to start in the basic panel. That's why it's at the top, by the way, because that's usually where most people will start. If I shot this with my DSLR, which is a Nikon or Nikon D850, then the first place I'm going to start is lens correction. You might say, well, what's the difference? Why would it depend on the camera? Because when I go to lens correction, this particular shot was not shot with a mirrorless. When I go to lens correction, there's a checkbox that I always like to start with called Enable Profile Corrections. And the reason I start with that is because I just want to get it out of the way so I don't forget. The reason I don't start with that with a mirrorless camera is because most mirrorless cameras that I've seen do the profile correction in the camera. So there's no reason to do it in Lightroom. There's no need to. It's already done. So what does that mean? What does lens profile correction mean? It's going to make, in most cases, a subtle change, but it's going to make an important change. When I turn this on, this was very subtle. It just kind of maybe lightened up the edges of the photo. And here's the difference. Off, look at the edges of the photo, on. Also, the other thing to look at, if you look at this spot right here in the middle of the photo, like right above the ice and right below the ice right here in the middle, watch the horizon line when I turn this on or off. See how it got a little flatter? It's a small little change. But the way you have to look at it is your lens is usually rounded. And therefore, the image that it captures has some of that roundness in it. And the lens profile correction flattens it out. So it makes it not so rounded on the edges. So I turn that on by default on my images so that it takes care of that correction. And there's even a way to set that up so it just does it automatically when you bring the images in. Now, how does it know how to do it? Well, if you look, the minute I turned it on, it said, oh, you shot this with a Nikon. And you shot this with this particular lens, a 14 to 24 lens, which I did. And you shot, and we're going to therefore use the Nikon profile for a 14 to 24 millimeter lens. How does it know that? Lewis, this is not live. This is a recording. How does it know that? It knows that by, I'm joking, Lewis, of course this is live. It knows that because it looks at the metadata inside the image. So therefore it says, oh, I recognize what this was shot with. I know what camera, I know what lens. I'm going to go ahead and correct it for you because I know what those two should be corrected together. If it did not recognize it or pick it up out of the metadata, you can still go in and manually tweak the distortion, or if you know what it was shot with and it didn't pick it up in the metadata, you could go in and choose it. So I could say, oh, I know what lens or camera shot this, and I could go and pick the lens and camera that shot this, and we are constantly updating this list. So every time there's a camera raw update or a Lightroom update, we're typically adding the newest cameras. I'm like looking at all the LOLs. We're adding the newest cameras and lenses all the time. So we know cameras and lenses come out all the time, and we're always updating those. Okay, so with that said, that would be the first thing I do. So I just either I'll show you later how to set that up so that when your images come in, it's already on. But that's the first thing I do. Not shot with a non-mirrorless, go turn that on. Shot with a mirrorless, it's already on. I don't need to do anything. And by the way, if you did this with a mirrorless image, it would say, instead of picking the profile, it would say in body or in camera or something like that. It would let you know that it's already been applied. Okay, next up, let's go to basic. All right, so the basic panel. Now that I've done that, there's another thing I would do right off the bat. I would pick a profile, and we're going to spend a few minutes talking about what profiles are and why you would use them or not. If you shot your image in RAW, then you can use the RAW profiles. If you didn't shoot your image in RAW, if it's a JPEG, then you can't use the RAW profiles. It's as simple as that. But you can still use profiles even on a JPEG. So what do these profiles mean? And why do they even exist? If you think about the difference between RAW and JPEG, for example, people tend to sometimes get disappointed when, like I'm looking at an image where I'm kind of disappointed already. They get disappointed when they look at the image that they saw when they clicked the shutter, looked one way, and then when they got back to their computer, it looked not as great. It kind of looked blah, not punchy, not crisp, it's crisp, but not bright, not saturated, not all of those things. That's because you shot in RAW. And what RAW says is, I'm not going to touch the image. That's what your camera says. I'm just going to give you the image straight off the sensor, save a digital file. I'm not going to process it. I'm not going to try and make it look better. I'm not going to do anything. So Anthony asked back on the lens profiles, what if your lens is not listed? Then you can't do it automatically. You'd have to manually adjust the sliders. So you can, even if it's a lens not listed, you can still go do it yourself. All right. So your image coming out of your camera RAW doesn't look as great as maybe the JPEG would have looked. Why? Because the JPEG got processed by the camera. It got processed by whatever settings you told it in the camera. Hey, I like my images vivid. I like my images saturated. I like my images whatever. And it looked great. Even when you shot in RAW, that quick preview you saw in the back of the camera was a JPEG preview, just so that it would look good. But the actual RAW image is unprocessed. So what are, and Davidson's asking a question, I'll get to that in a second. What are the profiles then? The profiles are a starting point. They're not intended in any way to be the final edit. They're a starting point to kind of push that image along to make it look better than it did just coming out of the camera. So there's subtle changes. And if I go pop up the list, you'll see my choices. My choices are Adobe Color, Landscape, Portrait, Standard, Vivid. These five, actually these four really, but these five are the RAW profile. So if you pop that up and it just says Adobe Color and no other choices, it's because it's not a RAW image, or at least Lightroom doesn't see it as a RAW image. So what I could do is I could play with each one. I could say, oh, well, this is kind of a landscape shot. And I could see it got a little bluer. So it was a subtle change. Well, it's not a portrait. It's not a person. I wouldn't do that. But maybe I want it to be Adobe Standard. And that looks more dull. So that. By the way, Adobe Standard is what we were using before Adobe Color. Well, maybe I want it to look vivid. That's more like what I would want, but still a long way from being a final edit. That's not what we want. All right, and Jason's already answered the question for chromatic aberration. I kind of just skipped over it. What he's referring to is back in the lens correction, there's a checkbox for this, remove chromatic aberration. And when I check it here, it's not gonna do anything because it's removing a problem that this image doesn't have. So it doesn't do anything. What chromatic aberration is, and I'd have to look for it. Maybe I'll show it on another stream. I have a shot where I photographed a model up on a mountaintop canyon kind of thing, and the sun was coming down behind her. And if you zoom in and look at the edges of that photo, where the sun and the lens didn't quite differentiate properly, there's a green fringe around the edge of that image. So if you see that and it's being caused by the light, not something you did in the slider, something that was already there, removing chromatic aberration would take care of that. So I don't turn that on by default because I only turn it on when I need to. There's no reason to turn it on images that aren't having that problem. So it's when you zoom into an image, you look around the edges of the subject and it's like a green or just a halo around them that was caused by the shot, not by something you did in post-processing, then remove chromatic aberration would do that for you. Okay, back to the basics. All right, so I would start with my profile. Now that I've done that, I've got this image set up and ready to go from an editing standpoint. So what do I mean by from an editing point? What would I do next? Well, honestly, before a year ago, I would just start moving sliders. I would start saying, oh, the highlights are too bright. Let's bring those down. That's better. Oh, I want it to be more saturation. Let's bring that up. That's too much. Maybe more vibrance instead. Okay, that's better. Oh, it looks a little too bright. Let me bring down the exposure. Yeah, that's better. Let me bring up the contrast. Yep, so in other words, I was just keep playing that what if game. I'm gonna undo those. I don't want to reset it all the way back. I'm just gonna undo those. Because I don't want to do all that anymore. I don't want to do that for every single image. I don't want to do that. I just want to get a better starting point. So we already got a semi-better starting point just by going to a profile. The better starting point, is I want these sliders to become a better starting point. But I don't want to have to do it myself. I want it to be automatic. Now, auto has always been there. It's been there pretty much since day one. But it was kind of like it just did the same thing to every photo. So it was like, if you didn't like it, you didn't like it, and it was going to be the same result on every single photo. Now auto is AI-based, Adobe Sensei-based. So in other words, it looks at the image, compares it to other images like it, compares it to other tonal values like it, and then sets those sliders for you. Now, anything that's automatic, chances are you're going to get one of three results. Oh my God, it's amazing. Glad I clicked that button. It's okay. It made it better. I still need to do some work. Or, oh my God, that's awful. How do I undo this as quickly as possible? Those are the three that you're always going to have. So you have nothing to lose by clicking auto. Because even if it's the middle one, which it is most of the time for me, it did a better job. It made it look better in most cases. It's still not exactly where I would want to be. So it did most of the work, and then I would just tweak the things that I don't like about it. So for example, if I click auto, there we go. Whoa, that's what I mean. You did most of the work for me. I love that difference. So again, here's the before and after of that. Oh, hang on, that was before and after the last slider. So skip that. Here, let's undo it. That's before, and that is after. So huge difference. Now, that doesn't mean I'm finished. That doesn't mean I like it. That doesn't mean I'm finished with it. I'm in love with it. But it definitely got me most of the way there to where I wanted to be without me having to move all of these sliders manually. Now, what I tend to not like it doing, and they fixed one thing that was driving me nuts that I had to do every single time. In the later versions of Lightroom and Camera Raw, contrast used to always go negative. Like 99% of the time, it would go negative on auto. Now it doesn't anymore. Yay, I don't have to keep tweaking contrast every single time. So that they fixed. The other thing that it does that I don't necessarily care for, in most cases, it will drop the saturation. And I tend to it's personal preference. I don't like my images less saturated. So I would either set that back to 0 or increase it. I usually rarely go less. So to get it back to 0, and any one of these, by the way, if you want to start back at the beginning, just double click on the slider and that will set it back to 0. So double click, puts it back to 0. I don't want my images less saturated. If anything, don't change the saturation at all. What's the difference between vibrance and saturation? Saturation we typically use on non-people subjects. In other words, subjects that are like this. It's a landscape. There's no people in it. There's no skin tones to worry about. So we can saturate usually landscapes to death, almost to the point of overdoing it. But when it's a person and you increase the saturation, if you go too far, which you can go too far pretty quickly, you'll tend to start screwing up the skin tones. So I don't use saturation on people, rarely ever. I use vibrance instead. Can I use both on a landscape? Absolutely. What's the difference? Saturation will saturate the overall image. So all the colors get more saturated, no matter what they are. Vibrance looks at more of the luminance of the photo and adjusts the colors accordingly just where they need it. So you can try one or the other, or you can try both. On a landscape, I usually stick to both. On person, vibrance only. On anything else, it will either be one or the other. It won't be, and sometimes both. So just vibrance for people is the easiest way to remember it. All right, exposure, drop the exposure down. Maybe I don't want it to go down as much, so I can increase that back up just a little bit. Increase the contrast, which I'm fine with. It dropped the highlights, which I'm fine with. And increase the shadows. And by the way, shadows are those dark areas that we want to be more exposed. So I want that foreground to be even more exposed. So it didn't increase the shadows enough for me. So I increased them a little bit more. The blacks of the photo got darker, and that they were overblown before, and that's fine. I don't mind those being darker. But the thing that auto does not do is it does not touch these three sliders. So auto does not touch texture, clarity, and dehaze because it's just not built into the algorithms yet. It's just not built into the AI yet. So what's these three? And by the way, texture is fairly new. So first and foremost, let's start at the bottom. Let's start with dehaze. Dehaze starts to remove the atmospheric haze from the photo. So, and you can overdo it really quickly. So that's overdoing it. That's way too much. So let's back off, go all the way back to 0, and just increase it a little bit. And it will just start to bring out some of that cloud detail, some of those clouds both above and in the water. So it just removes some of the haze, starts to bring out that detail. Great. Then what's texture and clarity? Before texture, we just had clarity. And let me zoom in on the photo so we can kind of see these edges here. If we increase clarity, I'll exaggerate it so you can see it. It's almost like a sharpening slider, even though it's not technically sharpening. It's just bringing out the clarity of the image. The problem with clarity, and this is why we added texture, is clarity will also affect the tone of the image. So the darker areas are getting darker. The lighter areas are maybe getting lighter or darker as well. But clarity will affect the overall tone as well as making the image more punchy. So before, that's all we had, and you would only use it a little bit because if you go too far, you're affecting the tone of the image and you would have to go adjust the other sliders accordingly. If I set that back to 0, then what's texture? Texture is all the beauty of clarity without the adverse effect of the tones. So I can bump up the clarity and just, look at that, look at what it does to that ice. Oh my God. It's almost like it's HDR. It's just bringing out the detail and the clarity of that ice in that mountain range or those rocks behind it without adjusting the tone. So the question then is like, oh my God, when would I ever use clarity? I'm done. Texture is it. It's my favorite slider. And it is my favorite slider between the two. But there are times where sometimes clarity does look better. So it will, again, that's why you have a choice. That's why texture didn't replace clarity. You use the one that works best for you. All right. Davidson said, I heard some photographers say they don't increase their contrast. That's on them. All of this, by the way, is not, I'm not saying these are rules. These are all personal preferences. If you talk to photographers, oh, no, I never touch contrast, then that's what they never touch. I always want more contrast in my photos. It is, every single slider is a personal preference. Some people like their work really dark. It drives me nuts. I want my work a little bit more exposed. It's all personal and subjective to each individual photographer. The beauty is in the eye of the beholder. You don't use contrast, don't use contrast. You use contrast, you use contrast. It is totally up to you. Is texture like sharpening in Photoshop? No, because there is sharpening. So texture is just what it's called. It just brings out more texture and detail in the photo. There is a total separate sharpening feature. And so it is not the same thing. All right, now I could sit here all day and we need to move on because I've spent way too much time on this image already. But before I move on, because at this point it would be continuing to tweak this image. There's one more thing besides the tonal stuff that absolutely you should take care of in your photos when you need to. Your photo, especially if you're shooting a landscape, a horizon, a sunset, a whatever, should not be crooked. And this image looks like it's leaning a little bit the whole image looks like, if you look at that range of rocks in the background, looks like it's leaning a little bit to the right, my right. So I could, even if I'm perfectly satisfied with the tones, I can't live with it being crooked, because once you see it, it will drive you crazy. So we go to our crop tool, and I could just grab the corner and rotate it. I could rotate it and straighten it out and just turn it up a little bit, and that would be straight. I'm going to undo that, because there's a better way than eyeballing it. Even though the crop tool is great, gives you that nice grid, lets you see it as you do it, awesome, but we don't want to necessarily have to rely on our eyes. So instead, we grab the crop tool, but we don't turn the crop. We just grab this angle tool. What the angle tool lets me do is draw a line on what should be straight. So if I draw a line and say, this line should be straight, when I let go, it perfectly straightens that line. No guessing. No, did my eye really line it up to the grid? As long as I lined it up to what I think should be straight, then what I thought should be straight is now straight. I may have done it a little too much, but that's okay, because I can always undo it, because all of this is non-destructive. And I can say, well, instead of that line, maybe I should go based on this line. That tweaked it just a little bit. So don't go out with crooked horizons. Now, you might see a horizon that's literally at a 45-degree angle. Photographer did that on purpose. But what you don't want your photo to look like is that it was an accident, like you just forgot to straighten it. So it's okay to be creative and go out and be crooked, exaggerate it crooked, but not just a little crooked, because then that looks like a mistake. Okay, again, I could spend all day on that photo, but let's move on. Let's go on to this next photo. Now, this next series of photos really isn't about editing any one of these photos. It's about teaching you something about applying multiple edits to the same photo. Because people also ask this question all the time, like, why Lightroom? And it's because not only can you edit and do everything I just did to that photo, but you can edit multiple photos at the same time. So in Lightroom Classic, it's very easy to do that. You select 2 or more photos. When you go into the Develop module, there's a checkbox. I turned it on once, never turn it off again, except for when I'm showing somebody what it does. By default, it's like this. It's just sync. That means that it will not automatically apply whatever you do to every photo. It will just apply it to the first one you selected. Turning this on, so it's a little switch, flipping the switch up, turns it on auto sync. So that means that now anything I do to the most selected photo, we talked about this last week, the most selected photo is the one that's got the lighter outline around it. So now, hang on, I forgot to do that. Now, that's the most selected photo. That's the most selected photo. So whichever is the most selected photo, when you go into your Develop module, that is the one you're adjusting, but because auto sync is turned on, it's adjusting all the photos the same way. So let's get creative with this photo. Let's apply some split toning. And I want to get it out of the way in case I forget to do it later. So let's go to split toning, and let's go to, and what I want to explain about split toning is I typically start with a black and white when I split tone, and I typically only do one or the other. I either only do the highlights or I only do the shadows. Rarely do I do both. You can, I'm not saying it's a rule, but I'm just telling you how I work. All right, so let's start with black and white. How do I get to a quick black and white? Just hit the letter V as in Victor for black and white. That will get you to a black and white default. Then what a split tone is saying I want to take either highlights or shadows or both, but in my case, I'm going to do the shadows because this photo has more shadows detail and the image is about the shadows more than it is about the highlights. I'm going to take the shadows and I'm just going to apply a color to those shadows. So if I go in and I say that whatever, I first pick the color I want, let's say I want a nice blue, pick the blue I want, and then I adjust the saturation of that blue. So that's giving me the split tone look of a blue filter or blue gel on those photos. But because I have auto sync turned on, It's adjusting all 5 or all 50 or all 500 or all 5,000, how many ever photos you have selected. And it's not just the sliders. If I go into that photo and I go to crop and I crop this photo down, let's say I literally crop it down, then I'm saying all the photos get cropped down. Even if they're vertical, they got cropped down. So what you're saying when you have multiple photos selected and you're on auto sync is whatever I do, make sure you do it to all of them. Now, here's one of my favorite hidden tips about multiple selected photos. I showed you that when you select more than one, which is, by the way, I'll show you again, select one photo, hold down the Shift key and select multiple ones, or select one photo and then hold down your Command or Control key to select multiples. Okay, so you can skip around. When you have multiple photos selected and you just want to get back to one photo selected, there's a couple ways to do that. Ooh, the power just fluctuated. All right, a couple ways to do that. I would have never guessed this. I think I want to thank Benjamin Ward on the Lightroom team for showing this tip one day. When you click on the actual thumbnail, that's making it the most selected photo. But if you click the area outside the thumbnail, you're saying deselect all the other photos and just select that one. So just a quick tip. And by the way, just like in Photoshop, there is a, if I go to, I don't remember where it is. There it is. If I go to select, there is a select none, Command D, just like in Photoshop. So Command D works the same way as it does in Photoshop for deselecting. All right, so now, if you go over to the Lightroom cloud-based version, there's no develop module, so there's no auto sync. Then how would I do that same thing here? And how would I do this on mobile? Because mobile more replicates Lightroom cloud-based than it does Lightroom Classic. So how would I do that same thing where I want to apply the same edit to multiple photos? So let's go edit this photo. And we did a split tone earlier. Dun, 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 dun. I'm going to go to color. And I want to go to, I don't want to go to the mixer though. I want to go to, actually, maybe I do. Just trying to decide what I want to do this. All right, let's go in and let's say that I want to adjust the hue of this. I don't want to do that. Okay, let's do, all right, let's warm it up. Let's just warm up the photo. Great. I just want to make a big visual difference is what I was trying to do. All right, so now that I made that big visual difference to that photo, even if I had had the other photo selected, it wouldn't have done anything. So how do I make it so that what I just did to that photo applies to the rest? Well, when you have a photo selected that you've done something to, you go up to Edit and copy it. Then you can select the other photos and paste. And that will paste your edit across those photos so that they get the same treatment. All right, so that is how the other Lightrooms do it. So whether it's Lightroom Cloud on the desktop, Lightroom Mobile on your mobile devices, iPhone, iPad, Android, whatever it is, there's no auto sync, it's copy paste. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't a copy paste on Lightroom Classic desktop. There is, it's for after the fact. In other words, oh, I didn't have them all selected when I did all that cool editing like this one. I didn't have another photo selected. What if I wanted to apply everything I did to that photo to this one after the fact? Well, auto sync wouldn't do that. So let's go to develop. And you have the same thing down here in the lower left corner behind my head. So here, I'll switch myself over to the other side. So you have the same thing down here. You have a copy and a paste. So if I hit copy, it lets me even choose what to copy. Like, what did I do to this photo that I want copied? What modules in the develop module do I want? Do I want all of the basic stuff? Yes. Do I want texture and clarity? Yes. What do I want? Dehaze? Yes. And anything else I would have done, I can copy everything I did to that photo, then go to one or more other photos, and when I go to develop, I can hit paste. And it will, of course, that photo is different, so it screwed this one up. But it would have pasted everything to this photo that I did to the other one. So if I go to the sliders, they all look the same, even though they're not for this photo, it would apply them. So if you want to do it after the fact, copy paste. If you want to do it beforehand, auto sync. All right, let's go back. Let's go actually reset this one. Reset, there we go. Okay, next up. So I wanted to get this out of the way because people ask this question all the time. So I wanted to show both ways, copy, paste. Now let's continue editing. And I've used this example before. So if you ever watch me, forgive me for using the same example again and again, but it's a great example. And it's an example of when the color is not right in your photo. The color is not right in this photo. This photo is way too yellow, way too warm, way too whatever you want to call it. Now, this is usually because there's a white balance problem, and there is a white balance selection here. Now, your choices for white balance will be more, meaning you have more options. If it's raw, if it's JPEG, you'll have auto and custom and as shot. You won't really have any choices. So I can say, oh, they're standing under a fluorescent light, fix that for me, and it will just do it. Or I can say, oh, maybe it's a tungsten light. Fix the, oh, no, it's not tungsten. That's making them green. That's not right. So you'll see quickly if you grab the wrong one. I didn't use a flash, so obviously that didn't work. And I can just go back to auto. And I don't like any of that. So let's go back to as shot. And I'm glad none of those worked because I want to show you the way to do it when none of those are going to give you what you want. Well, in addition to just choosing the pop-up for the right one, or in the case of a JPEG where there's nothing to choose, you have this big eyedropper right here. This is your white balance eyedropper. That white balance eyedropper, I love it. It's gold. Because what this will let you do is choose something that should have been neutral in your photo. Typically, you're looking for something that was a neutral gray. Like the gray around the photo. Like that would be awesome if that were in the photo, or if they were holding a card, a gray card. That'd be awesome. They weren't. So I could find gray, like for example, his belt buckle is silver, should have been silver, kind of grayish. I could use that. But what if there was no gray at all? What would you do? Then in that case, you would go in and grab something that should have been black, or should have been white. Like his shirt should have been white, but it's beige. It's like, Her blouse should have been black, but it's kind of like beige because the whole image is too beige. So if I just click on her blouse, click on the black part of her blouse that should have been black, then it fixes it just like that. So a quick click will fix that. Now, the other problem I have with this photo is it is crooked, not creatively. It is crooked in the wrong way. So I would go in this case, I could use the angle tool, but in this case, I am going to do it manually because I'm not going to make it totally straight because it's going to crop off too much. I'm just going to straighten it up a little bit more so it looks like it'd be okay. There we go. So they're not leaning one way or the other. All right, that's what I would do on that photo. Next up, now we're going to start to get into what are called selective edits, edits that don't apply to the whole photo. Everything we've done to this point, sliders apply to everything. What if you only want to apply edits to a specific part of the photo? You might think, oh, don't I have to go to Photoshop for that? No, I mean, it depends. But you do have selective edits inside of Lightroom as well. So if I go to my develop module on this photo is really dark and I could brighten up the whole photo, but I kind of like the fact that there was no light in this old church, this old what do you call it? Log cabin style church. So what I want to do instead is I'll go to the basic thing and I would go do all the same things I'd mentioned before. But if I just want to lighten up part of the church or part of the wall, because I remember seeing something over here when I took this shot, but I can't see it at all now. Then I can go into one of my selective edits. You have a radial filter and you also have a linear gradient filter. I'm going to use the radial one because it's in the shape of a circle, just like that. But before I choose it, I can also choose a preset for what I want it to apply. What I want it to apply is exposure. I want the exposure of this to be brighter. And you can set the exposure to whatever you want up front or change it after the fact. So right now I just bumped it up 1.7. All right, I'm going to come out here and I'm just going to say that I want this part of the photo to be brighter. Move this around. It made it a little brighter, but I don't have to stop there. I can really go in and dial this in. Oh my God, the hidden text from the ancients is there on the wall. Okay, but anyway, I don't even know what that says, nor do I care at this point. But I can go in and adjust just that part of the photo, make that part of the photo darker, even get rid of a little beam of light coming from the sun from the window, make that beam of light just a little bit better, just increasing it, or increase it to the point where I can even read what's on the wall. And what we take so for granted about this is rendering in real time. Even if I move this around, it's like walking around the church with a spotlight. I can illuminate any parts of the photo, and more importantly, if I want another light down here in the corner, I can add another one. I can make as many of these points as I want and edit each one individually. So here's the original point. That one's still here, move it around. This one's still here, move this one around, change whatever settings I want. And even though I started with exposure, you have the ability to go in and adjust anything else. So for example, maybe the exposure is where I want it to be, but I also want the contrast to be a little higher as well. So I can increase or decrease the contrast of that area of the photo without adjusting anything else. So just keep in mind that if there's a part of a photo you want to look better, you don't have to live with adjusting all the sliders, which may wreck part of the other photos. The question is, I want to know if I was using a tablet or a mouse. I am actually on a 16-inch Wacom Cintiq. So yes, I'm not using the features of it right now, but yes, I am using a tablet 99.9999999% of the time. Okay, so selective adjustments. They don't stop with just radial or linear. So for example, let's go over to this photo, which I've shown before. Not in this masterclass, but I've shown this before. So let's go in and let's say I just do an auto tone. And that kind of lets me see what's there. It lets me see that there are other parts of this photo that are visible in the photo. But again, if I want to keep it kind of moody and dark like this at sunset, I can. But maybe I want to expose just this part of the photo. So we have an adjustment brush, where you will see me use the tablet, by the way. The adjustment brush, same thing. I have exposure, and now I can take my brush and I can go in with that tool and I can say, brush that adjustment over on this side of the photo. We don't really see much happening because now that I've made that adjustment, I can go into just that part of the photo and tweak it. So I can make just that part of the photo lighter. Ooh, I skipped a spot. Let's not leave that out. And now I can really play creatively with my lighting, with my adjustments, and say the left side of the photo needs to be lighter, but keep the right side of the photo where it was. And hey, while we're at it, I don't like the water. The water kind of looks dull. I wish the water were bluer. So I can make another adjustment with the brush, click New. Then I can say, no, not exposure. Let's do temperature instead. So using these presets, by the way, just zeroes out all the other ones and makes the adjustment to the one that you chose. So in this case, it's adjusting the temperature. I can make it a little cooler. And now when I paint on the water gets bluer. So I'm literally changing the color of something in Photoshop with the adjustment brush just by brushing in the areas that I want. If I brush too much, you can make your brush smaller. Like I got some of the railing there. Hold down my Option or Alt key and undo it on that spot. It's not undoing the other stuff. It's just undoing the blue because that's the point I'm editing right now. So with every new adjustment point, you have an actual point that shows you what your edit is. So if I hover over it, it shows me that's the one I did for that. If I hover over this one, it's already selected, but that's the one I did for the blue. So it shows me any spots I kind of overdid it. In this case, I overdid it here as well. And any spots where I didn't do it enough. All right, so the adjustment brush is part of Lightroom, part of Camera Raw, part of mobile. You have the adjustment brush on mobile as well. You have the radial filter, linear filter as well. So let's do one more. While we're on this photo, let's grab our linear gradient and let's also maybe set that one to dehaze. So I want to dehaze the sky. So I'm just going to pull it down. Nothing really happened there, but if I increase my dehaze, my sky gets a little bit more dramatic. All right, and I can also adjust other things. If I want the temperature of the sky, well, I got that to be a little bluer as well, I can. If I want the saturation of the sky to be a little bit more saturated, I can. I can do multiple adjustments with the one type of adjustment point that I've added. Linear gradient, radial filter, or linear filter, radial filter, adjustment brush are all selective edits. And of course, the horizons cricket we will straighten out as well, but you get the idea. All right, speaking of selective adjustment, here's a tip that I always use for if you have like this white glow from your softbox inside the lens of your glasses of your subject, you could go in and use your adjustment brush. And then you could go in and say that you want to dehaze, which is what I want. And I'm just going to dehaze this bottom part of the glasses here. This bottom part of the glasses here. You can lift up and keep going. That will still be one adjustment point. So even though it's not contiguous, even though I'm picking different parts of the brush, it will treat that all as one brush point. So I can kind of add more of the white or remove the white from those glasses, kind of getting rid of some of that glare in the glasses as well. All right, next up. Got like a few minutes left. Why don't we jump over to, because we kind of did, I was going to do just more brushing on this, but you kind of get that idea. Let's move over to removing distractions. Now, just keep in mind, sometimes a distraction is just too funny and not worth removing because it's hilarious. So, true story. High school reunion, 20th anniversary reunion. A group of classmates were standing out in the hall and I just grabbed this photo. And I had no idea until I got home what I grabbed. And when you look at this photo, it just doesn't get any better than this. That's not an afro. That is a plant standing behind him. And I just, I couldn't have positioned him any better like that. Anyway, so that kind of distraction is probably better suited for Photoshop anyway, if you really wanted to take that out. Can you see the mask the brush is creating? Yep, I just showed you that. Hover over the point. All right, next up, let's go in and let's talk about another kind of distraction. Like in this case, the distraction is the softbox on the floor kind of got in the way. Well, an obvious thing I could do is crop it. I could crop that out and problem solved. But if you didn't want to crop it, if you wanted to keep the photo in its same, size, then you wouldn't want to crop that out. What would you do? So we're going to go in and use another adjustment, which is the spot removal tool. I think the other version of Lightroom calls it the healing brush. It is really the spot removal tool. The healing brush in Photoshop is different technology, better, blah, blah, blah. All right, so I'm going to go in and just simply say that I want to brush this. And it's going to, when I let go, it's going to automatically pick a spot to pull from. So that's the random part of this, whereas in Photoshop, it's not so random. It's picking the surrounding pixels. Oh, so it grabbed it from way up there. I have no idea why, but I'm going to go ahead and just pull it down. And in this case, it is doing a heal. I would probably switch it to clone. You have a toggle between clone and heal because clone, I want it to be the exact yellow that I pulled over. And maybe I would also not even pull it over from up there. I'd pull it over from down here. So it's the same shadows and same everything. So you can quickly remove things using your spot removal tool that are distractions in your image. All right, that's just another distraction. Let's go in and let's talk about, I got 1 minute left. What can I show you in 1 minute? Let's do a Lightroom Classic specific thing. So this one last image. Now, everything I showed you works across the board. And I talked about the differences that don't work across the board. This one is Lightroom Classic specific. What if I wanted to adjust the blue sky, but not adjust the green of the trees? In other words, I want to be very specific in this case. Well, if I go to my develop module and I go to my adjustment brush and I say, oh, I want to adjust the temperature of the sky, maybe make it bluer. When I start brushing this, it makes the sky bluer. But if I brush on the trees, it's just going to make that temperature bluer too, and I don't want that. So I'm going to undo that and just make one brush stroke, because once you make a single brush stroke, you'll be able to go down And in Lightroom Classic, you have a very specific option called range mask. So if I choose range mask and I choose color, then I'm telling it only apply to the color that I sample. So even if I brush over stuff that is different, it does not apply it to the green. It only applies it to the blue in between the green. So if you need to fix something or adjust something that is very intricate like this, then range mask in Lightroom Classic will let you do it, and that is currently a Classic only feature. So that's letting me adjust the temperature of all the other stuff without getting the temperature of the other color. All right. So we are, that went by quick. We are out of time. There are some more things I would love to show, but again, I know if I want to show it, I'll show it, but I'll get cut off because up next is the Daily Creative Challenge. And the Daily Creative Challenge is going to take place whether I'm ready for it or not. So I'm just going to go ahead and start saying my goodbye now. All right. So with that said, I want to thank everybody for watching. Again, watch the replay. If you're watching the replay, great. You can always see this again. Also, we'll be on next week. So we'll continue the editing and we'll get into Photoshop editing as well. All right. Cheers, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you on the next one. Bye, everybody. Have a good one.